What if everything you've been told about intelligence is a lie? What if the person you are today, the speed at which you think, the depth of your understanding, the creativity of your solutions, isn't who you're destined to be? What if your brain, right now, at this very moment, is capable of becoming fundamentally smarter? For over a century, we've been fed a comfortable myth. Intelligence is genetic. You're either born smart or you're not. Your IQ at 18 is your IQ at 80. The hand you're dealt is the hand you play. Schools sorted us, tests labeled us, and society told us to accept our cognitive fate. But here's what they didn't tell you. The smartest people in history were once considered ordinary, even below average. Albert Einstein was thought to be slow as a child. His teachers believed he lacked the fundamental capacity for intelligence. Charles Darwin was a mediocre student who despised the rigid memorization his schools demanded. Thomas Edison was literally expelled, branded as unteachable by the educational system of his time. Yet these same people didn't just succeed, they revolutionized human thought itself. They reshaped physics, biology, and technology. So what changed? Not their genetics, not their circumstances, not even their formal education. What changed was how they used their brains. They discovered, often by accident, the habits that force the brain to grow. Today, neuroscience has caught up with what these geniuses knew intuitively. We now understand that intelligence isn't fixed. It's plastic, moldable, trainable. Your brain can build new neural pathways at any age. The question isn't whether you can become smarter. The question is, will you do what it takes? I'm going to show you 6 research-backed habits that increase measurable intelligence. These aren't productivity hacks or study tricks. These are the fundamental practices that rewire how your brain processes information, solves problems, and generates insights. And the best part? History's greatest minds were already doing them long before we had the science to explain why they worked. Habit 1. Deep thinking without input. Here's the paradox. Most people believe intelligence grows by consuming more. More books, more videos, more podcasts, more articles, more information. We live in an age of infinite content, and we assume that more input equals more intelligence. But neuroscience reveals something shocking. Your brain becomes smarter when it's forced to think without input. When you stop consuming and start generating thoughts internally, you activate something called the default mode network. This is the neural system responsible for abstract thinking, creative insight, long-term reasoning, and connecting distant ideas. It's the part of your brain that solves problems you didn't even know you were working on. Albert Einstein understood this instinctively. He didn't become a genius by reading more textbooks. He performed what he called thought experiments. He would imagine scenarios that had never been tested. What would happen if I could ride alongside a beam of light? What if gravity isn't a force, but a curvature of space itself? These weren't calculations. They were pure mental simulation. Einstein would take long walks through Princeton, often alone, with no books, no notes, no distractions, just his mind working through problems. He once said, "I thought of that while riding my bicycle. Not while studying, while thinking." Modern studies confirm what Einstein practiced. Research shows that people who regularly engage in undistracted, deliberate thinking, without phones, music, or any external input, score significantly higher in problem-solving, strategic reasoning, and creative intelligence compared to those who constantly consume information. Think about it. When was the last time you sat in silence for 30 minutes and just thought? Not meditated, not relaxed, actively thought through a problem. For most people, it's been years. And that's exactly why growth has stalled. Smart habit daily thinking walks. 20-30 minutes, no phone, no music, no podcasts. Just you and a problem you're trying to solve. At first, it feels boring, then uncomfortable. Your brain will beg for stimulation. That discomfort, that's intelligence growing. That's your default mode network coming back online. The boredom is the point. Breakthrough thinking happens in the space between input and distraction. Habit 2. Struggle before help. Highly intelligent people have a strange relationship with difficulty. They don't rush to answers, they delay help. They sit with confusion longer than most people can tolerate. Psychologists call this productive struggle. And it's one of the most powerful mechanisms for building intelligence. Here's why. Your brain strengthens when it tries, fails, adjusts, and retries. Neural pathways don't form from being shown the answer. They form from finding it yourself. Benjamin Franklin was obsessed with this principle. He developed a deliberate training method. He would read a well-written essay, put it away, and then attempt to rewrite it entirely from memory. Only after struggling through his own version would he compare it to the original. This forced his brain to retrieve information, reorganize structure, and refine expression. Franklin wasn't memorizing, he was rebuilding ideas from scratch. And each time he struggled, his brain became stronger at constructing arguments, spotting patterns, and generating original thoughts. Modern brain imaging studies reveal why this works. When you struggle with a problem before receiving help, your brain activates deeper, more complex neural pathways. These pathways are more durable and more flexible than the shallow pathways formed by passive explanation. This is why watching a tutorial feels productive but doesn't stick. This is why reading the solution makes sense in the moment but evaporates from memory by tomorrow. Instant solutions bypass the struggle, and struggle is the mechanism that builds intelligence. Smart habit. Before asking for help, write your best answer, even if you know it's incomplete or wrong. Spend at least 10 minutes attempting the problem yourself. Document your thinking process. What did you try? Where did you get stuck? What assumptions did you make? Struggle isn't a sign of low intelligence. It's the prerequisite for building it. Habit 3. Writing to think, not just to record. Most people write to store information. They take notes to remember things later. But smart people write for a completely different reason. They write to clarify their thinking in real time. Leonardo da Vinci didn't write polished essays. His notebooks were chaotic, filled with questions, diagrams, contradictions, half-formed ideas, sketches, and fragments. They weren't organized. They were alive. They were thinking made visible. Writing forces your brain to slow down. It exposes gaps in your understanding. It makes vague concepts precise. When you write, you can't hide behind the illusion of comprehension. You have to articulate exactly what you mean. Research from Princeton and UCLA demonstrates that writing by hand, not typing, improves conceptual understanding far more than reading or listening ever could. Why? Because writing is generative. Your brain has to actively construct meaning rather than passively receive it. Here's the difference. When you read, you follow someone else's logic. When you write, you build your own. That construction process is what strengthens intelligence. Smart habit. Keep a daily thinking journal. But don't write what I did today. Write what I actually understand. Ask yourself, what idea confused me today? What concept feels half-formed in my mind? Can I explain this idea to a child? What contradictions exist in my thinking? Where am I repeating words without true comprehension? Intelligence grows where thoughts are examined, not just collected. Habit 4. Building mental models. Across domains, high IQ. Individuals don't just accumulate facts, they understand systems. They build what Charlie Munger called a latticework of mental models. Here's the key insight. Every field of knowledge reveals fundamental patterns. Physics teaches cause and effect. Biology teaches adaptation and evolution. Psychology teaches cognitive bias. Economics teaches incentives. Mathematics teaches structure and proof. When your brain learns across domains, it doesn't just add knowledge, it becomes flexible. This is called transfer intelligence, the ability to apply concepts from one context to solve problems in completely different areas. That's why polymaths dominated history. Aristotle studied logic, biology, ethics, and politics. Leonardo da Vinci mastered art, engineering, anatomy, and mathematics. Goethe wrote poetry but studied optics and morphology. These weren't people who knew more facts. They were people whose brains could transfer patterns from one domain to another. They saw connections invisible to specialists. Modern research confirms this. Cross-domain learners consistently show higher fluid intelligence, the ability to reason in novel situations without prior experience. They don't just solve familiar problems faster, they solve unfamiliar problems entirely. Smart habit. Every week, learn one concept outside your primary field. Not deeply, conceptually. Read about a scientific principle, entropy, emergence, feedback loops, a psychological bias, confirmation bias, anchoring, availability heuristic, an economic concept, opportunity cost, supply and demand, game theory, a mathematical idea, probability, exponential growth, marginal analysis. Your brain becomes smarter when ideas from different worlds start connecting. Habit 5. Deliberate memory. Training. Here's an uncomfortable truth. Memory isn't separate from intelligence. It's foundational. You can't think deeply about concepts you can't remember. You can't connect ideas that disappear from your mind. Nikola Tesla could visualize entire machines in his head, rotate them mentally, test them, identify flaws, all without building a physical prototype. His memory wasn't just strong, it was precise enough to function as a laboratory. Ancient scholars understood this. Before the printing press, before external storage, they trained memory deliberately using techniques that sound almost supernatural today. Memory palaces, mnemonic systems, visualization methods. They didn't do this just to remember facts. They did it because a sharper memory creates faster reasoning. When you can instantly recall concepts, your brain can spend its energy connecting them rather than searching for them. Techniques like active recall, spaced repetition, and visualization don't just store information. They reorganize neural networks. MRI studies show that individuals who deliberately train memory develop denser, more efficient brain connections. Smart habit. Practice recall before review. When you finish reading something, close the material and try to explain it out loud. Teach the concept to someone else. Draw it from memory. Test yourself before looking at notes. Memory is not a fixed talent. It's a trainable skill, and training it makes everything else easier. Habit 6. Protecting your cognitive energy. Smart people have a secret. They don't think all day. They think when their brain is at its strongest, and they rest when it's not. Charles Darwin worked only 4 to 5 intensely focused hours per day. The rest of his time? Walking, resting, reflecting, allowing his mind to wander. He understood that cognitive energy is finite, and forcing exhausted thinking produces diminishing returns. Chronic stress, sleep deprivation, and constant stimulation don't just make you tired. They actively damage executive function, one of the core components of measurable IQ. Your prefrontal cortex, responsible for reasoning and decision-making, literally shrinks under sustained cognitive load without recovery. Here's what most people miss. Your brain doesn't upgrade during hustle. It upgrades during recovery. When you sleep, your brain consolidates memories, prunes unnecessary connections, and strengthens important neural pathways. When you rest, your default mode network activates and generates insights you couldn't force during focused work. Intelligence isn't built through relentless grinding. It's built through strategic cycles of intense focus, followed by genuine recovery. Smart habit, protect these fundamentals. Sleep deeply, 7-9 hours consistently. Move daily, walking, exercise, anything that increases blood flow to the brain. Get morning sunlight, regulates circadian rhythm and cognitive function. Allow boredom, no phone, no stimulation, let your mind wander. Boredom isn't weakness. It's cognitive recovery. It's the space where your brain processes, connects, and strengthens. Here's the truth most people never accept. IQ doesn't increase through hacks, shortcuts, or quick fixes. It increases through consistent habits practiced over time. The smartest people in history didn't chase intelligence. They built systems that allowed intelligence to grow naturally. They didn't try to think harder. They created conditions where better thinking was inevitable. Einstein walked. Franklin struggled. Leonardo wrote. Darwin rested. Tesla visualized. They didn't follow these habits because they were geniuses. They became geniuses because they followed these habits. If you want to think more clearly, learn faster, solve harder problems, and build a genuinely stronger mind, start with habits, not information. Start with systems, not intensity. Your intelligence isn't fixed. It never was. The only question is whether you'll do the work to change it. If this video shifted how you think about intelligence, share it with someone who still believes IQ is genetic destiny. Subscribe for more science-based content on thinking, learning, and mental growth. And remember, every genius you admire was once exactly where you are now. The difference is they started building these habits. Today is your turn.